In this video, I'm going to show you how to make true kosher dill pickles. Just as background, there are basically two ways to make pickles to get the brine acidic enough to preserve the cucumbers. The most common one today, the industrial one, is to use vinegar, something that's already acidic, with the water and salt in the brine. That's what most commercial pickles are today. But the traditional way of making pickles, there's no vinegar used at all. It's only water and salt and the cucumbers. In this case, there's also dill and garlic. There's no vinegar in the recipe at all. True fermented dill pickles are a lacto-fermented food, like sauerkraut or kimchi. So I'm going to show you the simplest and easiest way to make almost any lacto-fermented food, but a true kosher dill pickle. Yesterday I got this full box, this case of pickling cucumbers from my farmer and friend Bruce Kaufman in East Hardwick, Vermont. And so that's about 20 pounds of pickling cukes. That's more than you may want to start with. I have these two crocks right here, and each one of those crocks holds about 7 pounds of cukes. So they're each gonna make about 7 or 8 quart jars of cukes. And these are really cool crocks. This is the Harsch pickling crock. It's a German-made crock, and I'll open it for you. The cukes go down in the center part with the brine. There are two of these half-moon shaped stones that go in and sit on top of the pickles and keep them down in the brine. And then it has this moat around the outside that you can see here. So you put some water in this and you put the lid on it. In the process of fermentation, CO2 is produced inside here and it needs to get out. This essentially creates an airlock. The air goes out under the lid. I've still got maybe as much as 10 pounds of cukes here. So I'm going to do these in jars. In terms of preparation of the cukes, we just want to rinse them and get any sand off them. So if you've never made any true lacto-fermented pickle before, you should definitely try this with at least one jar. Go to the produce department, buy 1 pound of pickling cukes. Don't get slicing cukes. The skins are not porous and they don't make good pickles. And then fill the jars as well as you can with whole pickles. So in the end, I am going to cut 1 cucumber. I really like to use whole cukes. Each jar gets, I'm going to figure 2 dill heads. But if you don't have fresh dill, you can use, I would say, a teaspoon of dill seed per quart jar. Start there anyway. And when you're doing it on a jar-by-jar basis, you can do a jar with 2 teaspoons of dill seed in it. It'll be good. You'll learn what you like. 1 garlic clove per jar, smashed and paper taken off. And a clove garlic per jar. A good big clove. We fill each jar with water right up into the neck. And then add 1 tablespoon per jar of salt. Any non-iodized salt like pickling salt, sea salt, kosher salt. Screw on the lids, finger tight. I'm not normally all that anal, but I'm anal about this. I write the date on top of each jar. Now it's about 18 hours after we put these cukes in the jars, and they are fermenting at room temperature. I always recommend over 70 degrees for 3 days. You'll see it's 78 outside, but the indoor temperature is that one down there, 75 too. That's a fine temperature for these guys to be fermenting at for the first 3 days. Get a little cooler than that at night. You'll notice that the jars are starting to build pressure. There's resistance under the cap. So I'm guessing this is 5 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a warm afternoon, and it got up to almost 80 in the kitchen here, and the brine in the jar got up to 75.6. So temperature at the very same time in the crock, 73.3, 73.4. So a couple degrees cooler than the brine in the jars. It went up to about 80 in here today, so in the jars the temperature fluctuation is greater. The mass of the bigger crock keeps it from getting as warm, and will probably keep it from getting as cool tonight. Back on. We've been opening these jars to measure things. You can open them when they're actively fermenting for short periods of time. And a temperature of 73.5, almost identical, in the crock made by my friend Diane Tatro. So now it's day 2 of the fermentation, or I would say we're a few hours short of 48 hours from when the pickles were originally made in the crock and in the jars. It's a little warmer today. This is indoor temperature down here in the corner, almost 79 degrees. So the jars, which we noted yesterday, warm up more. They're there under the blankets. There, under the jars. Just keeping them from getting up into the high 70s. See it bubbling away there? So just to review, we made these pickles on Tuesday, the 16th of August. Today it is Saturday morning, the 20th. And it's time to put the fermenting jars in the fridge and cool them down. They've had their, I said 2 to 3 days fermentation at room temperature. It's sort of been 3.5 days. So these guys are going in the fridge. But before I do so, let's see what they taste like. So I'm going to open it here at the sink. We'll just grab a pickle out of here. Take a little bit off of it to taste. Stick it back in. Close it back up. And now this goes into the fridge with the others, where I'd probably like to leave them at least about 2 weeks, but they can be eaten anywhere along the way. Indeed, we have this pickle. I would call it a half sour. Let's see what it looks like. It's still fairly cucumbery looking inside. Very crunchy and fresh, starting to get salty. Actually delicious. The salt flavor will be stronger in an early pickle because not as much acid has developed, not as much sugar has been converted into lactic acid. So the pickle is not as sour. And the sour flavor, once it develops, tends to mask the flavor of the salt. So this is a little salty tasting, but crunchy and very good. I'm also going to jar up the crock pickles, which have also been at room temperature for the last 4 days. And get the jars in under refrigeration, or put some of them down in my root cellar where it's a little cooler than room temperature anyway. For the curing period, which can last anywhere from a couple of days to 6 months, a year, if you have room in your fridge to keep them in there, they won't go bad. So, going into the homemade crock. So look at the pickles float right up in there as I pull the stones out. Now it's Monday, August 29th, 13 days after we originally made these pickles. They've been in the fridge for a little over a week now, and we've been eating them for a week or so, and they're really delicious. Now they'll keep easily up to a year in the fridge, and nearly that long if you have a cool basement to put them in. And we did this without any heat processing or canning whatsoever. So I'll go over the recipe for a 1 quart wide mouth mason jar one more time. 1 pound of pickling cukes, a head of dill or 2, a big clove of garlic, filled to the top with water, preferably unchlorinated water because we don't want to kill the germs in the jar, and a tablespoon of salt. And the next part of the recipe that's important is not the ingredients but the temperature for the fermentation. For the first 3 days, we want room temperature. This creates an active fermentation. There's more activity at a warmer temperature. And then after about 3 days, we put the jars in the fridge, or I put some of my jars in my root cellar, which in August in Vermont is at about 65 degrees. That's enough to slow down the fermentation. So I hope you got something out of this video, and I would love for you to leave comments in the comment stream below about your experience making pickles and if this video was useful for you. So good luck and happy pickling.